All characters and events in this story are the fruit of my imagination. If something seems like reality, it's just the stars aligning that way. Life is like a wheel, everything comes back in circles. Please don't judge too harshly. We are 100% against cheating, alcohol, anything prohibited, and any violation of the law. Write in the comments what city you are from and where you listen to this audio version. Share the vibe. Don't forget to like, tell your life story, and subscribe to the channel to stay up to date with new exciting stories. Lucas Harper turned the wheel of his blue Jeep Cherokee as he pulled out of the Coast Brew Works parking lot. It was a Friday and the sun was setting, casting a soft pink glow over the suburb of Astoria, Oregon. Cool sea air blew through the open window, bringing the scent of salt and pine. Lucas was 40, but he felt older today. Long hours in the warehouse, checking shipments, and reporting had worn him out. He wanted to get home, take off his hop-scented jacket, and have coffee on the porch. The drive home took 18 minutes, if you didn't get stuck in traffic on the Columbia River Bridge. Lucas knew this for a fact. He'd been timing it since he'd started working as a logistics manager at a brewery 10 years earlier. Back then, he'd been full of ideas, dreaming of opening his own waterfront bar. Now, he was just counting down the minutes until home. The radio was playing an old Nirvana song, but he was barely listening, preoccupied with endless invoices and the workday ahead. He glanced at the passenger seat, where his battered bag lay. A corner of a postcard was sticking out of the side pocket, an old, faded one he'd carried with him for years. Lucas reached in, pulled it out, and looked at it. It was of him and Clara, his wife, then a girl with long brown hair and a wide smile. They were standing on a pier in Seattle, their arms around each other, the sky at sunset in the background. It was their first vacation together since their engagement 15 years ago. Lucas frowned, shoved the postcard back in, and stared at the road. Why had he even remembered this? The Jeep turned onto the familiar gravel driveway that led to the house. It was a one-story cottage with gray walls and large windows that Lucas had bought with his first savings and renovated with his own hands. His grandparents had lived there, then he, and then Clara and their children, Ava, 13, and Owen, 9, had moved in. Lucas parked next to Clara's white Toyota RAV4, turned off the engine, and sat for a few seconds, looking at the house. The light was on in the living room, and the faint clatter of dishes was coming from the kitchen. She was home. The kids were probably home, too. Their roller skates were lying by the porch, as usual. He got out of the car, slamming the door a little too loudly, and headed for the front door. The keys jingled in his hand as he unlocked the car. The inside smelled of olive oil and basil. Clara must have been making her signature tacos. Lucas kicked off his shoes at the door, dropped his bag on the coat rack, and walked through the living room. Ava was sitting on the couch, staring at her phone. Her dark hair, like his, was pulled back into a braid, and her headphones were dangling around her neck. Bright images flashed across the screen, some of the videos she was always watching. "Hi, Ava," Lucas said, trying to sound cheerful. She looked up, yanked out one earbud, and muttered, "Hey, Dad." Her voice was flat, almost indifferent. Lucas suppressed a sigh. Teenagers. "How are you?" he asked, stopping at the sofa. "Fine," she replied with a shrug and looked back at her phone. "What are you watching?" Lucas nodded at the screen, trying to start a conversation. "Just a video. About drawing," Ava said, not looking up. "Nothing interesting." "Drawing? You like drawing? Will you show me later?" he asked. "Maybe," she muttered, putting the earphone back in. Lucas nodded, knowing there was no more he could get out of her. "Where's Owen?" he asked, looking around. "In her room, playing with her planes," Ava replied, not looking up from the screen. "Okay," Lucas said, and walked further into the kitchen. Clara was standing at the stove, chopping onions. She was wearing jeans and a gray t-shirt, over which she had thrown an old apron with embroidered seagulls. Her brown hair was pulled back into a loose ponytail, with a few strands brushing her neck. She looked the same as always, busy, focused. But Lucas noticed how her hand paused over the cutting board when he entered, and then quickly resumed chopping. Her phone was lying on the table nearby, and the screen suddenly flickered. Clara immediately grabbed it and shoved it into the pocket of her jeans, without even looking at Lucas. "You're early," she said without turning around. Her voice was slightly higher than usual, as if she were trying to sound calm. "Yeah, I finished the report early," Lucas said, leaning against the door frame. He looked at her, trying to figure out what was different. Her movements were a bit jerky, not as smooth as usual. Or was it his imagination? "What's for dinner?" "Chicken tacos," Clara said, stirring something in the pan. "Your favorite." "Cool," Lucas said, though his throat was suddenly dry. "Favorite. She always made tacos on Fridays, and it used to be a little ritual. She'd joke that he ate them like a teenager, and he'd ask for more. Now it was just dinner." He went to the coffee maker on the counter and poured himself a mug. The coffee was still hot, and he took a sip, feeling the warmth spread through his chest. "How was your day?" he asked, more out of habit than interest. "Fine," Clara replied, glancing at him briefly. "Closed an order for a batch of candles for a store in Portland. They want 50 more by next week." "Not bad," Lucas said, nodding. "Is this the store that had a trial run last month?" "Yes," she replied, returning to the frying pan. "They liked it. Maybe a permanent contract." "Great," he said, taking another sip. He waited for her to ask about his day. She used to always ask how things were going in the warehouse, even if she confused terms like inventory and logistics. But she remained silent, focused on slicing tomatoes. Lucas set the mug down on the table and looked at her back. Her shoulders were tense, as if she were waiting for something. He noticed the way her hand shook as she took the plates out of the cabinet. It was subtle, but Lucas had known her for 14 years. He could read little things like that, a slight tremor in her fingers, a glance to the side that was too quick. "Are you okay?" he asked, squinting. Clara froze for a second, then turned with a smile that seemed forced. "Yeah, sure," she said. "Just tired. Lots of orders, you know." "Okay," Lucas said, though something inside him was pricking. "Tired." She said that a lot lately. Tired from work, from running around with the kids, from housework. He nodded and took another sip of coffee, but the feeling that something was wrong didn't go away. "Call the children," Clara said, turning off the frying pan. "Dinner's almost ready." "Okay," Lucas replied, setting his mug down on the table. He walked into the living room and called out, "Ah, Owen, dinner." Iva looked up from her phone and sighed. "Right now," she muttered, putting away her headphones and slowly getting up from the couch. "No, now," Lucas said, crossing his arms, "and leave the phone here." "Seriously?" She rolled her eyes, but put the phone on the table. "I'm not eating with him." "Just leave it," Lucas said, and she snorted but complied. Footsteps sounded from above, and Owen came running down the stairs, his blonde hair disheveled and his airplane t-shirt slightly wrinkled. "Tacos?" he asked, his eyes lighting up. "Yeah," Lucas said, smiling. "Mom's." "Cool." Owen plopped down on a chair at the kitchen table, already holding a fork. Clara placed a plate of tacos in front of him, then Ava, who sat across from him with her arms crossed. Lucas took his and sat between the children. The food smelled delicious: chicken, spices, fresh vegetables. But the atmosphere at the table was heavy. Owen chewed enthusiastically, Ava picked at her filling, and Clara sat silently, staring at her plate. Her phone was lying face down next to him, and Lucas saw her glance at it. "It's delicious, Mom," Owen said, swallowing. "Did you add that hot sauce?" "Yes," Clara replied, smiling at him. "Just a little bit, so you don't cough like last time." "I wasn't coughing," Owen protested, but his lips twitched into a smile. "I just choked." "Of course," Clara said, her voice warming slightly, but she quickly turned away, picking up a napkin. "Ava, why aren't you eating?" Lucas asked, looking at his daughter. "I don't want to," she replied with a shrug. "I'm not hungry." "At least try," he said. Mom tried. "I tried," Clara confirmed, but her tone was even, without her usual humor. She looked at the phone again, and Lucas felt something clench inside. "Owen, how was school?" he asked to break the silence. "Cool," Owen said, taking another bite. "We made a model airplane in shop class. Mine almost took off." "Almost?" Lucas raised his eyebrows. "What went wrong?" "The wings are crooked," Owen admitted with a chuckle. "But the teacher said it was okay for a first try." "Not bad," Lucas said, smiling. "Maybe next time you can make it like the one on your t-shirt." "Exactly," Owen nodded, his eyes lighting up. "An F-16, just like the real thing." Ava snorted, but said nothing. Clara was silent, picking at her food. Lucas glanced at her, trying to catch her eye, but she avoided him. Her fingers tapped lightly on the table, and he saw her glance back at her phone. "Clara, why are you so quiet?" he asked, trying to sound neutral. "Me?" She looked up, her eyebrows raising slightly. "Just eating. Tired, I already told you." "Yeah, you did," Lucas said, but his voice was a little sharper. "It's just weird. You usually talk to Owen about his planes." "I'm chatting," she replied, her tone defensive. "Just not today. Can I just eat?" "Okay," Lucas said, looking away. He took another taco, but his appetite was gone. Dinner continued in silence, with only Owen occasionally commenting on his food or school. When the plates were empty, Ava stood up immediately. "I'm going to my room," she said, grabbing the phone from the living room table. "Wait," Lucas said. "Help me clean up." "Why?" She turned around, frowning. "Mom will clean it up." "We're cleaning up," he said firmly. "Get the plates." Ava rolled her eyes, but came back and grabbed her plate, carrying it to the sink. Owen followed, carrying his. Clara began gathering up the leftovers, her movements quick, almost nervous. Lucas stood up to help, and they ended up next to each other at the sink. "I'll wash it," he said, turning on the water. "Okay," Clara replied, taking the towel. "I'll dry it off." They worked in silence, as usual. Lucas washed the dishes, she dried them, but he could feel the tension. Her phone was on the table, and he saw her glance at it one more time before turning away. When he finished the last plate, Clara muttered, "I should check my email," and went into the living room. Lucas wiped his hands and listened. He heard a faint rustling sound and what sounded like keys being pressed. He looked out into the hallway and saw Clara standing by her bag, quickly typing something on her phone and putting it away. She turned, noticed him, and froze. "What?" she asked, her voice sharp. "Nothing," Lucas said, walking back into the kitchen. He sat down at the table, picked up his mug, and stared into it. The coffee was cold, but he took a sip to keep his hands busy. Something was wrong. He wasn't paranoid, but her behavior, the quick glances, the hidden phone was bothering him. He knew Clara too well, or thought he did. "I'll go to bed early," Clara said, returning to the kitchen. She avoided his gaze, fiddling with the edge of her apron. "I have to send out a shipment of candles tomorrow." "Okay," Lucas said, although nothing was okay. She left, her footsteps fading into the hallway. He sat there, staring at the empty table. The feeling that their lives had changed didn't leave him. The coffee maker hummed quietly on the kitchen counter, its steady noise breaking the Saturday morning stillness. Lucas Harper rolled over in bed, his hand sliding over the empty space where Clara should have been. The sheets were cold, untouched. He squinted at the clock on his nightstand. 6:30 am far too early for her, especially on a weekend. Lucas lay still for a few seconds, listening to the faint clink of dishes downstairs. She was awake, moving around the kitchen. Something about it seemed odd, but he couldn't quite place it. He sat up, his joints aching from a long week at the brewery, and swung his legs over the side of the bed. The cold wood floor touched his bare feet, and he rubbed his face, clearing away the last of the sleep. Lucas pulled on a clean t-shirt from the dresser and walked downstairs, his footsteps echoing on the creaky stairs. The smell of coffee hit him as he entered the kitchen. Clara was standing at the sink, pouring water into the coffee maker. She was wearing jeans and an old t-shirt, over which she had thrown an apron with embroidered seagulls. Her brown hair was pulled back into a loose ponytail, and she looked focused, but her movements were jerky, almost nervous. Her phone was lying face down on the table next to her. Lucas paused in the doorway, watching her. "Good morning," he said, trying to keep his voice neutral. Clara winced, nearly dropping the coffee maker, and turned around. "Oh, you're up," she said, her voice a little hoarse. "Good morning." Lucas noticed the dark circles under her eyes, which her makeup did nothing to hide. She looked tired, but not like she looked tired after a day at work. It was a different kind of tired, tense, like she was hiding something. He stepped to the refrigerator, pulled out a bottle of milk, and set it on the counter, more to keep his hands occupied than out of necessity. "Did you sleep badly?" he asked, opening the cupboard door for a mug. "Yes, a little," Clara replied, turning back to the coffee maker. "I was thinking about ordering. I need to finish the design for the candles." "Candles again." Lucas poured himself some milk, looking at her. "You were talking about the store in Portland yesterday. Have they given a new order yet?" "No, the same one," she said, her voice even, but she wasn't looking at him. "Just need to check the details. Color, packaging, that kind of thing." "Okay," Lucas said, though her words sounded like a recitation. He sat down at the table, holding his mug, and looked at her phone. The screen was black, but he remembered how she'd quickly put it in her pocket when he'd walked in yesterday. It wasn't the first time. She'd been doing that a lot in the last few weeks, grabbing the phone as soon as it blinked or taking it with her even to the bathroom. "Why are you so nervous?" he asked, trying to speak calmly. "I'm not nervous," Clara replied, her tone sharpening. She turned around, crossing her arms. "It's just the morning, Lucas. Let me wake up." "I was just asking," he said with a shrug. "You're twitching like I caught you doing something." "Caught you?" she frowned, her eyebrows drawing together. "What are you even talking about? I was just pouring coffee." "Okay, forget it," Lucas said, looking away. He took a sip of milk, but it tasted bland. Clara turned away, screwing the lid back on the coffee maker. Her movements were quick, almost fussy. She set the coffee maker down, and Lucas saw her hand hover over the phone, as if she wanted to pick it up but decided against it. "I'll wake the children," he said, standing up. "Or do you want me to?" "No, you go ahead," she replied without looking. "I'll finish here." "Okay," Lucas said, heading for the stairs. He went up and knocked on Owen's door. "Hey, kid, get up. Breakfast's coming up." A sleepy grumble came from behind the door. "5 minutes, Dad," Owen muttered. "3," Lucas said with a grin. "Don't make me drag you." "Okay, okay," came the rustle of a blanket, and Lucas nodded, satisfied. He walked over to Ava's room and knocked louder. "Ava, wake up. It's morning." "I'm not sleeping," she cried, her voice hoarse but irritated. "Leave me alone." "In the kitchen in 10 minutes," Lucas said, not wanting to argue. He knew better than to argue with Ava in the mornings. She was in the midst of teenage rebellion at 13. He walked back down to the kitchen. Clara was already pouring coffee into her thermos, her movements just as abrupt. She glanced at her phone, and Lucas saw the screen flicker. She immediately turned it over, almost reflexively, and continued screwing the lid back on her mug. Lucas felt the blood pound in his temples. This wasn't just a reminder of the order. It was something else. "Who's writing?" he asked, sitting back down at the table. "What?" Clara looked at him, her eyes widening. "No one. Just a reminder." At 6 in the morning, Lucas squinted, leaning closer. "What reminder?" "From the supplier," she said, her voice rising. "They want to check the delivery time. You know how it is." "I know," Lucas said, but he didn't. His job at the brewery was orderly, invoices, stock, reports. No one texted him at 6 in the morning, especially on a Saturday. He looked at her, trying to catch her eye, but she looked away, adjusting her apron. "I need to shower," Clara said, grabbing her phone and heading for the stairs. "See the kids out, okay?" "Same as always," Lucas replied, his voice even but seething inside. He heard her footsteps fade down the hallway, and then the bathroom door slammed. The sound of running water began, and Lucas sat there, staring at the empty table. Her mug sat next to him, steam rising from her coffee. The phone was gone with her. He clenched his fists, feeling his nails dig into his palms. Something was wrong. He didn't want to be the kind of husband who spied on his wife, but her behavior was bothering him. Lucas stood up and walked into the bedroom where they had slept. The door was ajar. He walked in, looking around. Her bag was on the chair next to the bed, but her phone was gone. He ran his hand through the pockets of her jacket, hanging on a hook. Nothing. Then he heard a faint sound, a vibration muffled by the fabric. It was coming from under her pillow. Lucas froze. His heart was pounding so loudly that he could barely hear the running water from the bathtub. He walked slowly to the bed, pulled back the pillow, and saw her iPhone, face up. The screen lit up with movement, a missed message. The sender's name was Elliot S. The text was short, "Meet me at 9, don't forget." Lucas stared at the screen, feeling the floor shift beneath his feet. Elliot. Who was this? A coworker? A client? A friend? He'd never heard that name before. His fingers shook as he picked up the phone and swiped to unlock it. The password. Of course she'd changed it. It used to be their anniversary's 0920, the day he'd proposed. He entered the numbers. Wrong. He tried Ava's birthday's 0412. Wrong. Owen's birthday 1015. Wrong again. Shit, Lucas muttered, his voice hoarse. He put the phone back, but the screen flickered again. A new text from the same Elliot. You in the shower. Text me later. Lucas stepped back, as if the phone might burn him. The shower. This Elliot knew she was in the shower. Knew she was home, getting ready for the day. Knew more than he did. Dad, Owen's voice came from the hallway. Lucas winced, quickly putting the pillow back and walking out of the bedroom, closing the door. Yeah, kid, he said, trying to keep his voice even. Owen stood there in his airplane pajamas, rubbing his eyes. Is breakfast ready? He asked, yawning. Soon, Lucas replied, putting his hand on his shoulder. Go wash up, I'll call Ava. Okay, Owen said, shuffling toward the bathroom. Lucas went down to the kitchen, his mind spinning. Elliot. The 6M texts. Clara hides her phone. He poured himself coffee from the coffee maker, though his hands were shaking. The hot mug burned his fingers, but he barely noticed. He sat at the table, staring at the empty space where her phone had been. Ava, he shouted, trying to distract himself. Come down, it's time to eat. I'm coming. Her voice was irritated from above. Lucas heard the footsteps but didn't turn around. He stared into his mug, feeling anger and confusion mingle inside him. Clara came out of the bathroom a few minutes later, her hair damp and her phone in her hand. She shoved it into her jeans pocket when she noticed Lucas and stopped. Are the children up? She asked, her voice strained. Yeah, Lucas replied without looking at her. Owen's washing up. I'll be down in a minute. Okay, said Clara, walking over to the stove. I'll make some toast. Toast? Lucas looked up. You always make pancakes on Saturdays. I don't feel like it today, she replied, her tone sharp. Toast faster. Okay, Lucas said, feeling his irritation rising. He wanted to ask about the phone, about Elliot, but the kids were there. Ava came down, her dark hair disheveled, her face frowning. Toasts? Seriously? She muttered, sitting down at the table. Yes, Ava, said Clara, placing a plate in front of her. Eat what they give you. I'm not hungry, Ava replied, crossing her arms. Try it, Lucas said, his voice firm. Don't start. Ava rolled her eyes, but took the toast. Owen walked in, his face freshly washed, and he smiled when he saw the food. Can I have some jam? He asked. Of course, Clara said, taking the can out of the cabinet. She smiled at him, but Lucas saw her gaze flicker to her pocket where her phone was. He gripped the mug tighter, feeling the coffee burn his fingers. It wasn't just a text. It was more. Lucas Harper slammed the door of his blue Jeep Cherokee, parked outside his house on the outskirts of Astoria. Saturday morning had left a bitter taste in his mouth. The texts from someone named Elliot on Clara's phone, her evasive answers, her quick movements as she hid the phone. He started the car, and the roar of the engine drowned out the noise of his thoughts. He usually didn't work Saturdays, but he'd picked up a shift at Coast Brew Works today to check on the hops shipment and clear his head. The kids were home, Ava probably on her phone and Owen fiddling with his model airplanes. Clara had said she'd be taking orders for candles. Lucas glanced through the windshield at the house. The kitchen light was on, but he didn't want to go back. Not yet. He pulled onto the road leading to the brewery and turned on the radio. Some pop song was playing, but he wasn't listening. Thoughts of Clara kept coming, her phone tucked under her pillow. Meet me at 9, don't forget. Are you in the shower? Who was this Elliot? A coworker? A friend? Lucas gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. He didn't want to think the worst, but the images kept coming. Clara laughing with someone else, her hand touching someone else's. He shook his head, forcing himself to focus on the road. Stop it, he muttered out loud. You don't know anything. The drive to the brewery took 12 minutes. Lucas pulled into the lot of a large brick building with a sign that read Coast Brew Works. The smell of hops and malt hit him as he walked through the service entrance. Inside, it was noisy. Machines hummed, workers chatted, a forklift hauled pallets of boxes. Lucas nodded to the security guard and walked into his office, a small room with a metal desk covered in papers and an old computer. Hey, Lucas, Jack, his partner, a lanky guy with a shark tattoo on his forearm, called out. He was standing by the coffee machine, pouring himself a mug. What are you doing here on a Saturday, missing us? A delivery of hops, Lucas replied shortly, throwing his bag on a chair. We need to check. Seriously, this couldn't have waited until Monday, Jack smirked, but his gaze was intent. You look like you haven't slept. I was sleeping, Lucas muttered, sitting down at the table. Just a lot to do. Well, whatever, Jack said with a shrug. I'm in the warehouse if anything happens. Give me a shout if you need me. Yeah, Lucas nodded, turning on the computer. The screen lit up, and he opened a spreadsheet of shipping data. The numbers and letters blurred before his eyes. He tried to focus, but his mind kept returning to Clara. Her voice when she said, just a reminder. Her eyes avoiding his. Lucas leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. Pull yourself together, he told himself, but it didn't help. He stood up, picked up the folder with the invoices, and headed to the warehouse. Maybe some physical work would distract him. The warehouse was cool and smelled of wood and beer. Workers were unloading sacks of hops, and Lucas joined in, checking the labels. He checked the numbers on the invoice, but his hands moved mechanically. Memories swirled in his head, not of this morning, but of the past, of how it all began. He and Clara met in 2009, when he was 24 and she was 22. He had just moved back to Astoria from college in Seattle, full of plans to start his own business. Clara worked at a local coffee shop, Brew Haven, serving lattes and muffins. Her brown hair fell in her face as she set his coffee in front of him, and her smile was so warm that he kept coming back every day. One day, he plucked up the courage to ask her for a walk along the boardwalk. She accepted, and 6 months later, he proposed right there on the beach, with the waves crashing. She laughed, said, okay, and kissed him, and he thought it was forever. Lucas, are you okay? Jack's voice broke his thoughts. He was standing next to him, holding a clipboard with the report. You've been staring at that bag for 10 minutes now. Yeah, I'm fine, Lucas said, blinking. He realized he was holding the same bag of hops without even checking it. Just thinking. Thinking, Jack narrowed his eyes. You look like the world has ended. What happened? Nothing, Lucas snapped, placing the bag on the pallet. Let's get to work. Whatever you say, boss, Jack said, but his tone was skeptical. He moved to another row, and Lucas returned to the invoice. But the work was not going well. He had mixed up 2 batches, and one of the workers, a young guy named Tim, noticed. Hey, Lucas, there's a mistake. Tim said, pointing to the box. These are the wrong kind of hops. Damn, Lucas wiped his forehead. My fault. I'll fix it. No problem, Tim said, but looked at him curiously. You're not on duty today, are you? It's fine, Lucas muttered, waving it off. He fixed the label, but inside he was seething. He couldn't work. He couldn't think. Elliot. The name stuck in his head like a splinter. Lucas walked back into his office, sat at his desk, and stared at the screen. The spreadsheet was open, but he couldn't see the numbers. Instead, he was remembering how he and Clara had renovated the cottage. They bought it in 2010 when it was his grandfather's old house. The walls were crumbling, the roof was leaking, but they tackled it together. Lucas remembered painting the living room, Clara smearing paint on his cheek, and him hugging her back, leaving marks on her sweater. They laughed, fell to the floor among the cans and newspapers, kissed until the paint dried on their clothes. Everything was easy then. They were together then. Lucas, are you coming to lunch? Jack peered into the office, interrupting his thoughts. No, Lucas replied without looking up. Later. Don't starve to death, Jack said with a chuckle. You're already like a zombie. Thanks for your concern, Lucas muttered, and Jack left, shaking his head. Lucas pulled out his phone, opened his messages. The last one from Clara was yesterday. Buy milk. Nothing more. He wanted to text her, ask about Elliot, but decided against it. Not over the phone. This had to be face-to-face. He remembered Ava being born. Clara screams in the hospital, squeezing his hand until her nails leave marks. When he held her, tiny and dark-haired like his, it all made sense. Then Owen came along, fair-haired like Clara, calm and curious. They were a family. They coped with the sleepless nights, the debt, his shifts, her dreams of starting her own business. Clara quit the coffee shop, trained as a designer, and started making candles. Lucas was proud of her. But when has it changed? When did her smiles become less frequent? Lucas, are you still here? Sarah, the brewery's receptionist, poked her head into the office. Her red hair was pulled back into a bun, and she was holding a folder. I thought you were taking Saturday off. Delivery, Lucas said shortly, looking away from the screen. You don't look well, Sarah said, frowning. Maybe you should go home. We can handle it. I'm fine, he replied, his voice sharper than he intended. What's in the folder? The report is for Monday, she said, putting the folder on the table. But it's not burning. Go home, Lucas. I told you it's fine, he opened the folder, but the letters blurred again. Sarah sighed and left, closing the door. Lucas leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes. He couldn't stay here. He couldn't pretend everything was fine. He needed to go home. He needed to talk to Clara. By 4 o'clock, he'd given up. The shipment had been checked, but he hadn't finished the report. He threw the folder on the table, grabbed his bag, and walked out, muttering to Jack, I'm going home. Early? Jack raised his eyebrows. Are you sure you're okay? Yeah, Lucas lied, heading for the door. He got into the Jeep, started the engine, and drove. The drive home seemed longer than it had this morning. He looked at the familiar streets, the store signs, the bridge over the Columbia River, but everything felt foreign. His marriage was falling apart. He could feel it in her eyes, in her words, in those texts from Elliot. He didn't know what she was hiding, but he knew it wasn't just work. It wasn't just exhaustion. Clara, he said out loud, as if trying out her name. What are you doing? He parked at the house, turned off the engine, and sat for a few seconds, looking at the cottage. Clara's Toyota was still there. The light in the kitchen was on. She was there. Lucas gripped the steering wheel, feeling his heart pounding. He couldn't keep quiet any longer. Tonight, he would ask her, directly, without hinting. And if she lied, and he was sure she would, he would know what to do next. He got out of the car, slammed the door, and headed for the entrance. The keys jingled in his hand. He knew this conversation would change everything. But he was ready. Standing in the hallway, he could hear the clatter of dishes from the kitchen and the muffled voices of the children. Clara was home, cooking dinner, as if nothing had happened. Lucas kicked off his shoes, hung his jacket on a hook, and clenched his fists. Today he would ask, directly, without hints. He walked through the living room where Ava, his 13-year-old daughter, sat on the couch, her head glued to her phone. Her dark hair was braided, her headphones dangling around her neck. She didn't even look at him. "Hi, Ava," Lucas said, trying to sound calm. "Hi, Dad," she muttered, not looking up from the screen. "Where's Owen?" he asked, looking around. "Upstairs, playing," Ava replied, her voice indifferent. Lucas nodded and headed into the kitchen. Clara was standing at the stove, stirring taco filling. She was wearing jeans, a white t-shirt, and the same apron with seagulls. Her brown hair was pulled back into a ponytail, a few strands escaping to brush her neck. She looked busy, but Lucas noticed her hand pause as he walked in. Her phone was lying face down on the counter, like a sentry to her secrets. "You're home," Clara said without turning around. Her voice was even but slightly trembling. "Yeah," Lucas replied, leaning against the doorframe. "Just got home from work." "It's early," she remarked, stirring the pan. "I thought you'd be late." "Finished quicker," he said, watching her. Her movements were practiced, but too fast, as if she were in a hurry. He went to the coffee maker and poured himself a mug, though the coffee was already cold. He took a sip to keep his hands busy. "What's for dinner?" "Tacos," Clara replied, glancing at him briefly. "Like yesterday. There were a lot left, so I decided not to throw them out." "Okay," Lucas said, sitting down at the table. He watched her back as she chopped onions, laid out flatbread. Everything looked normal, but he could feel the tension in the air. His phone was next to him, and he saw her glance at it before turning away. "How's your day?" he asked, more out of habit. "Fine," she replied without turning around. "I made arrangements with a store in Portland. They want another batch of candles." "Again the candles," Lucas said, his tone neutral, but his inside seething. "You've been talking about them all morning." "It's work," Clara snapped, her voice sharper. "And what about you?" "Warehouse reports," he answered shortly, "as always." She nodded without saying anything. The silence fell, broken only by the sizzle of the pan. Lucas looked at her hands, the slender fingers, the short nails, the wedding ring he had put on her 14 years ago. He remembered that day, the beach in Astoria, her smile, her okay. She seemed like a different woman now. "Call the children," Clara said, turning off the stove. "It's time to eat." Lucas stood up and walked into the living room. "Ava, Owen, dinner," he called. Ava sighed, putting her phone away, and trudged to the table. Owen came running down the stairs, his blonde hair disheveled and his airplane t-shirt rumpled. "Tacos again?" he asked, sitting down. "Yes, kid," Lucas said, sitting down next to him. "Eat what they give you." "Cool," Owen smiled, grabbing a flatbread. Clara set the plate in front of him, then Ava, who scowled as she picked up her fork. Lucas got his portion and began to eat, but the taste was bland. He looked at Clara, who was sitting across from him. She was picking at her food, her eyes flickering to her phone. Lucas tightened his grip on his fork. "Mom, did you add hot sauce?" Owen asked, chewing. "Just a little," Clara replied, smiling at him. "You don't want to cough like last time, do you?" "I wasn't coughing," Owen protested, but laughed. "I just inhaled the wrong way." "Of course," Clara said, her voice warm, but Lucas noticed her glance quickly at her phone. The screen was black, but her fingers were tapping on the table. "Ava, why are you silent?" asked Lucas, looking at his daughter. "I don't want to talk," she muttered, without looking up. "Can I finish eating and go?" "Eat well," Lucas said. "The phone can wait." Ava rolled her eyes, but continued eating. Dinner dragged on. Owen chatted about his new model airplane, Clara nodded, Ava said nothing. Lucas ate mechanically, his gaze returning to Clara. Her hand twitched toward the phone a couple of times, but she held it in. Each gesture was like a jab. When the plates were empty, Ava jumped up. "I'm going to my room," she said, grabbing the phone. Wait, Lucas said. Help me clean up. Why? She turned around, frowning. Mom will clean it up. We're cleaning up, he said firmly. Ava snorted, but carried her plate to the sink. Owen followed, carrying his. Clara began gathering up the remains, her movements swift. Lucas stood up to help. I'll wash it, he said, turning on the water. Okay, Clara replied, taking the towel. I'll dry it off. They worked in silence, as always. Lucas washed the dishes, she dried them, but the tension between them grew. Her phone was on the table, and Lucas saw her glance at it before she picked up another plate. The children went upstairs, their footsteps fading. Lucas knew the moment had come. Clara, he said, turning off the water. His voice was low, firm. We need to talk. She froze, her hand holding the plate still. About what? She asked, her voice cautious. She looked at him, her brown eyes wary. About Elliot, Lucas said, looking into her eyes. Who is he? Clara went pale. The plate almost slipped from her hands, but she set it down on the table. Elliot? She asked, her voice shaking. What are you talking about? Don't pretend, Lucas said, stepping closer. I saw the message this morning. Meet me at 9. Are you in the shower? Who is that? She turned away, pressing her hand to her forehead. You looked at my phone? Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper. It was vibrating under the pillow, Lucas said, not looking away. I wasn't digging. I just saw it. Who is it, Clara? The silence fell like a wall. Clara swallowed, her chest rising and falling rapidly. You weren't supposed to see that, she said, her voice weak. Shouldn't, Lucas raised his voice, but held it back, remembering the kids upstairs. You're hiding your phone, lying to me, and I shouldn't have seen it. Tell me, who is Elliot? She pressed her lips together, her eyes darting around. He's a coworker, she said finally. We're working on a project, a candle shop in Portland. He's a designer. A colleague, Lucas repeated, his voice thick with sarcasm. A colleague who texts you at 6 in the morning, who knows you're in the shower. That's not it, Clara said, her voice growing louder. You've got it all wrong. We're just hanging out. He's helping with the design. Communicating? Lucas stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. You expect me to believe that texting at 6 in the morning isn't work? It's work, she snapped, her face turning red. You don't understand how this happens. We have different schedules. We text when we can. Different schedules? Lucas shook his head. You're lying, Clara. I can see it in your eyes. She froze, her hands shaking. I'm not lying, she said, but her voice was weak. You're always like this. Suspicious, spying. Maybe it's your fault I feel this way. Is it my fault? Lucas clenched his fists, his voice growing louder. I work hard at the brewery so we can have this house, so the kids can go to school, so you can make your candles. And you're texting some guy named Elliot and blaming me. You're never home, she cried, her eyes filling with tears. You're always at work, in your reports, in your world. When was the last time you asked how I was? When did we talk about anything other than the kids and the bills? Don't change the subject, Lucas said, his voice cold. This isn't about me. This is about you and Elliot. Did you sleep with him? Clara winced, her face twisting. No, she said quickly. How can you think that? I don't. It's not like that. Then why are you hiding your phone? He asked, coming closer. Why are you shaking when I ask? What are you hiding? I'm not hiding anything. Her voice broke. She retreated to the stove. We're just talking. He was there when I was down. You don't notice me, Lucas. I don't notice, he almost shouted, but he held back, lowering his voice. I come back here every day to you, to the children. I do everything so that we can live normally. And do you find someone who is nearby? It's not what you think, she said, her voice shaking. It's just friendship. He understands how hard it is to run a business. You don't. Friendship, Lucas chuckled, his lips curling. Friendship that starts at 6 in the morning with texts about showers? Are you serious? She was silent, looking at the floor. Her hands fiddled with her apron, and Lucas could see she was struggling with herself. I didn't cheat on you, she said finally, her voice quiet. I swear. Lucas looked at her, anger boiling in his chest. He didn't believe it. He couldn't believe it. Her eyes, her trembling, her evasive words, everything screamed that she was lying. But he didn't want to lose it. Not now, not in front of the children. We're not done yet, he said, his voice hoarse. He turned and walked out onto the porch, slamming the door behind him. The cold evening air hit him in the face. He sat down in the wooden chair, clutching a mug of cold coffee. His heart was pounding, his thoughts were racing. Clara had admitted to communicating with Elliot, but she had denied cheating. That was not all. He could feel it. Sunday morning blew into the garage through the murky window, casting gray light onto the dusty Yamaha Bolt motorcycle. Lucas Harper sat on an old chair at the workbench, his eyes bloodshot from a sleepless night. The cold concrete floor was chilling his bare feet, and the smell of motor oil mixed with fatigue. After the fight with Clara last night, he hadn't returned to the bedroom. He couldn't lie down next to her, knowing she was lying. Her words about friendship with Elliot, her evasive gaze, her shaking hands all pointed to betrayal. Lucas clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms. He had given her a chance yesterday. Today, he would rip the truth out of her. He stood up, his joints creaking, and headed into the house. The kitchen door creaked as he entered. Clara was standing at the sink, pouring water into the coffee maker. She was wearing the same gray t-shirt and apron with seagulls, her hair pulled back into a messy bun. She winced at the sound of his footsteps and turned around. Her face was pale, with dark circles under her eyes. Her phone was lying face down on the table, as always. You weren't sleeping, she said quietly, her voice hoarse. Not sleeping, Lucas replied, stopping at the table. His voice was cold, hard. He looked at her, not taking his eyes off her. We need to finish this conversation. Clara swallowed, her hands hovering over the coffee maker. Lucas, I told you everything yesterday, she began, but her voice wavered. Elliot's a coworker. We just... Enough, he interrupted, stepping closer. Don't lie to me. I know what you're hiding. I saw the messages. Meet me at 9. Are you in the shower? This isn't work. She retreated toward the sink, her fingers gripping the edge of the counter. You don't understand, she said, her eyes darting around. It's not what you think. Then tell me what it is, Lucas said, his voice growing louder. Because all I can see is that you're cheating on me. Clara went pale, her chest rising and falling rapidly. I'm not. It's not cheating, she said, but her voice was weak. I told you, we're just talking. Communication, Lucas stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. You hide your phone, lie to my face, and now you're telling me this is communication. You slept with him, Clara. Say it. She froze, her eyes filling with tears. Lucas, please, she whispered. Don't do this. Tell the truth, he barked, his voice echoing in the kitchen. I've known you for 14 years. I can tell when you're lying. Admit it. Clara covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. The silence hung heavy and stifling. Lucas watched her, his heart pounding. He waited, knowing her answer would change everything. Finally, she dropped her hands, her face wet with tears. Yes, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Once, in his studio, after work. Lucas felt the floor shift beneath his feet. Her words hit him like a hammer, shattering everything he knew. He'd expected it, suspected it, but hearing it was another matter. His throat tightened, anger and pain mixing in his chest. Once, he repeated, his voice hoarse. You went to him and slept with him? On purpose? Yes, Clara said, her voice shaking. It was a mistake. I didn't mean to. A mistake? Lucas stepped closer, his fists clenching. You knowingly went to bed with him, and now you call it a mistake? Do you even realize what you did? I'm sorry, she whispered, her tears streaming. I didn't mean to hurt you. I regretted it right away. It was a one-time thing, Lucas. Once, he shook his head, his lips twisting. Is that supposed to comfort me? You destroyed everything. Our family. Us. I didn't destroy it, she cried, her voice breaking. I was alone. You can't see me. Don't blame me, Lucas barked, his voice loud, but he kept it down. I worked so we could have this house, so Ava and Owen could live normally. What about you? Did you find yourself a lover because you were bored? It's not about boredom, she said, her voice shaking. It's about feeling empty. Elliot, he was kind. He listened. It started out as conversations. Conversations, Lucas chuckled, his voice full of bitterness. Conversations that ended in his bed. Are you serious? I didn't mean for this to happen, Clara said, her eyes full of tears. I stopped. It was a one-time thing. I love you, Lucas. Love? He stepped toward her, his voice cold. You betrayed me. You betrayed Ava and Owen. You destroyed everything we built. We can fix this, she said, holding out her hand. Please. For the children. I'll do whatever you want. Lucas stepped back, his face twisted in anger. No, he said firmly. There's no fixing this. I'm filing for divorce, and I want you out. Today. Divorce? Clara froze, her hand hanging in the air. You can't. We've been together for 14 years. You destroyed them, he said, looking into her eyes. You slept with him. You lied to me. I can't live with that. Where should I go? She asked, her voice breaking. This is my home, too. Not anymore, Lucas snapped. This house is mine. I bought it, I rebuilt it. We have a prenuptial agreement, and it will protect me. Pack your things and go. Clara began to sob, her body shaking. Please, she whispered, give me a chance. For Ava, for Owen. You didn't think about them when you were with him, Lucas said, his voice icy. You made a choice. Now it's my turn. He turned and walked out of the kitchen, his footsteps echoing through the house. Clara was sobbing behind him, her sobs echoing in the silence. Lucas went down to the garage, slamming the door. He sat down on the chair next to the bike, clutching his head in his hands. His heart was pounding, anger mixing with pain. She had confessed. She had slept with Elliot. Consciously, this was the end. He didn't know how he would tell the kids, how he would explain that their mother was gone. But he knew one thing, he couldn't stay with her. Dad? Owen's voice came from the garage door. Lucas looked up. His son was standing in his pajamas, fiddling with the hem of his t-shirt. What are you doing here? Mommy's crying. I know, Lucas said, his voice hoarse. Go inside, kid. I'll be right there. Did you have a fight? Owen asked, his eyes full of worry. Yes, Lucas answered honestly, but we'll figure it out. Go ahead. Owen nodded and walked away, his footsteps fading. Lucas closed his eyes, feeling the pain tightening in his chest. Lucas Harper stood by the kitchen window, looking out at the empty driveway where Clara's white Toyota had been parked that morning. Now her car was gone, and so was she. On the table was a note, written in her neat handwriting. I'm at a friend's. I'll call. Sorry. Her wedding ring was next to it, gleaming dully in the lamplight. Lucas didn't touch it, just clenched his fists, feeling the anger and pain warring inside him. Sunday morning, when Clara confessed to cheating on him with Elliot, had turned everything upside down. He'd kicked her out, told her he was filing for divorce. She'd cried, begged, but left. Now he was faced with the hardest part, telling the kids. The sound of footsteps upstairs interrupted his thoughts. Ava and Owen were home, Ava probably in her room on the phone, Owen fiddling with model airplanes. Lucas took a deep breath, trying to stop his hands from shaking. He didn't know how to start this conversation, but he knew he couldn't stay silent. The kids deserved the truth, even if it broke their hearts. He walked into the living room, where the TV was quietly blaring a cartoon. The sofa was empty, and the remote was lying on the table. Lucas turned off the TV and silence filled the room. He sat down in the chair, hugging his knees, and called out, "Ava, Owen, come down, we need to talk." There was a thud from upstairs. Owen was the first to appear, his blonde hair disheveled and his airplane pajamas rumpled. He was 9 years old and looked at his father curiously. "What's wrong, Dad?" he asked, sitting down on the couch. "Wait for your sister," Lucas said, trying to keep his voice even. "It's important." "I'm here," Ava muttered as she came down the stairs. Her dark hair was pulled back into a messy ponytail, her phone in her hands. She was 13, and her scowl said she wasn't in the mood. She plopped down on the couch next to Owen, crossing her arms. "What again? I'm busy." "Put the phone away," Lucas said, his voice firm. "Seriously?" Ava rolled her eyes, but put the phone down on the table. "Will this be quick?" Lucas looked at them, Ava with her teenage sass and Owen with his innocent eyes. His children, his world. He had built this house for them, worked at the brewery so they could have everything. And now he was going to ruin their idea of family. He cleared his throat and began. "Guys," he said quietly, "I need to tell you something. It's hard, but you need to know. Mom won't be living with us anymore." Silence. Owen blinked, his brows furrowing. "What do you mean, won't live?" he asked, his voice high. "She went somewhere?" Lucas shook his head, his throat tightening. "No, Owen. She's gone. She and we're not going to be together anymore. I asked her to leave." Ava sat up straight, her eyes wide. "You kicked her out?" she shouted, her voice sharp. "Why? What did you do?" "I didn't do anything," Lucas said, meeting her gaze. Her dark eyes, like his, were blazing with anger. "She was with another man, not as a friend, so I told her to leave." Owen frowned, his face scrunching up. "With someone else?" he asked, his voice confused. "How so?" Ava turned to her brother, her cheeks flushed. "Don't you get it?" she snapped. "She cheated on Dad, with some guy." Owen blinked, his eyes widening. "Like in the movies?" he asked quietly. "Mom with someone else?" "Yeah," Lucas said, his voice firm but crumbling inside. "I found out yesterday. She confessed this morning. I couldn't leave her here after that." Ava jumped up from the couch, her hands clenched into fists. "You kicked her out because of this?" she screamed, her voice breaking. "I don't care what she did. She's my mom. You can't just throw her out." "Ava, sit down," Lucas said, raising his hand. "I didn't just kick her out. She betrayed us, all of us." "Betrayed?" Ava stepped towards him, her eyes shining with tears. "You think I care what's between you two? I need my mom. You didn't even ask us." "I couldn't ask," Lucas said, his voice growing louder. "She made a choice, Ava. She was with someone else. I can't live with that." "Can I?" she cried, her tears breaking through. "You're selfish. You only think about yourself. Where is she now? Where did she go?" "To see a friend," Lucas replied, trying to sound calm. "She left a note, said she'd call." "To see your friend?" Ava snorted, her voice full of sarcasm. "And you believed her? You kicked her out, and now she's out there somewhere, and we're here with you." "Ava, that's enough," Lucas said, his patience wearing thin. "I didn't want this. She made a choice. I had to do something." "You ruined everything," she screamed, her voice echoing in the living room. "I hate you for it." She turned and ran upstairs, her footsteps thundering down the stairs. The door to her room slammed shut, shaking the walls. Lucas closed his eyes, feeling the pain tighten in his chest. He expected her anger. Ava was stubborn, emotional, but her words cut like a knife. He opened his eyes and looked at Owen. The boy was sitting on the couch, his eyes red, tears streaming down his cheeks. He wiped them with his sleeve, looking at his father. "Why did she do it?" Owen asked, his voice weak. "She doesn't love us." Lucas felt his heart break. He stood up, walked over to his son, and sat down next to him, putting his arm around his shoulders. She loves you, he said, though the words burned in his throat. It's not about you, Owen. It's about her and me. Sometimes adults do bad things that ruin everything. But you're important to her. And to me. Owen pressed himself against him, his tears soaking Lucas's t-shirt. I don't want her to go, he whispered. I want things to go back to the way they were before. I know, Lucas said, patting his head. I wanted to too, but it won't work. Owen sobbed, his small body shaking. Will she come back? He asked, lifting his tear-stained face. Lucas pressed his lips together, choosing his words. She'll be around, he said. You'll be able to see her, but she'll live separately. Owen nodded, wiped his nose on his sleeve, and leaned into his father. Lucas held him, feeling his son calm down. He looked at the empty couch where Ava had just sat and felt the weight of guilt. His children were suffering, and he couldn't protect them. Not from this. Dad, Owen whispered, not taking his eyes off him. Are we staying here? Yes, Lucas said, squeezing his shoulder. You're with me. This house is ours. I'll take care of you. And Mom? Owen asked, his voice quiet. She'll call, Lucas replied. You'll be able to talk to her, I promise. Owen nodded, his tears fading. Lucas looked up at the ceiling, hearing the faint sound of music coming from Ava's room. She was angry, and he didn't blame her. She loved her mother. They both did. But he couldn't forgive Clara. Not after she slept with Elliot. Go wash up, Lucas said softly, letting go of his son. And get a cookie from the jar. Just don't tell Ava I said so. Owen smiled weakly and stood up, shuffling toward the kitchen. Lucas remained in the living room, watching the off television. He heard Owen open the cabinet, the jingle of the cookie jar. Then the footsteps faded and the house was silent. Lucas stood up, walked over to the table, and picked up Clara's note. He read it again. I'm at a friend's. I'll call. Sorry. He crumpled the paper and threw it in the trash. He put the ring in a drawer without looking. He sat back in his chair, feeling the weariness weighing on his shoulders. The conversation with the children was over. Their world had collapsed, and he didn't know how to put it back together. But he had promised them that they would cope, and he would do everything to make it true. Lucas Harper's phone vibrated on the kitchen counter, startling him out of his thoughts. Monday morning had begun in silence, the kids asleep upstairs, the house empty without Clara. Her note and engagement ring from the night before were in the drawer, but their weight still weighed on him. After Clara confessed to cheating on him with Elliot and left, Lucas had spent the night staring at the ceiling, replaying the conversation with the kids. Ava screaming, accusing him, Owen crying, asking if his mother loved them. Now the phone was flashing her name, Clara. Lucas clenched his jaw, fighting the urge to hang up. He had to answer. He had to hear what she had to say. He picked up the phone, swiped his finger across the screen, and held it to his ear. Yes, he said, his voice cold. Lucas, her voice was hoarse, like she'd been crying. We need to talk. We talked, he replied, sitting down at the table. You said it all. So did I. No, she said, her tone sharpening. You didn't give me a chance. You threw me out without listening. I want to explain myself. Explain? Lucas chuckled, but there was no humor in it. You slept with Elliot, in his studio, on purpose. What's there to explain? She fell silent, and he heard her breathing heavily. I did it, she said finally, and I'm sorry, but you don't understand why. Enlighten me, he said, his voice growing louder. Why did my wife, the mother of my children, go to bed with another? Because I really want to know how you can justify it. I'm not making excuses, she said, her voice shaking. I'm trying to explain. Do you think it was easy, living with you when you were always at work? When you came home and didn't say anything? Elliot, he was there. Nearby, Lucas gripped the phone, his fingers white. You could have talked to me. You could have come to me instead of him. You took the easy way out. Easy, her voice grew louder. You think it was easy, living with guilt, Knowing that I messed everything up, I hated myself. Lucas, you could have not slept with him, he said, his words sharp. That would have been a good start. She sobbed, and Lucas pulled the phone away from his ear. You're cruel, she said, her voice weak. You weren't like this before. And you weren't a liar, he replied, his voice breaking. He immediately regretted it, not because it wasn't true, but because it hurt him. I can't forgive you, Clara. You know that. Please, she said, her voice pleading. The children, what's wrong with them? Have you told them? Yes, he replied. Yesterday, they know what you did. Ava hates me for throwing you out. Owen asked if you loved him. She began to sob, her sobs loud. I didn't mean to, she said. I love them. I love you. I want to go back. You're not coming back, he said, his voice cold. I'm filing for divorce. I've already spoken to a lawyer. Divorce? Her voice rose, panicked. You can't just write me off. I'm their mother. I have rights. You lost your rights when you slept with him, he said. You can see the kids, but they'll live with me. That's not up for discussion. I'll fight, she said, her voice growing firmer. You think I'll just give in? This is my home, too. I've put as much into it as you have. You didn't put anything in, Lucas snapped. I bought it. I rebuilt it. The contract will prove it. You don't know what it will prove, she snapped. I'll hire a lawyer. I won't let you take everything, and I won't give up the kids. Try it, he said, his voice calm, but inside he was seething. We'll see what the court says when they find out you cheated. She fell silent, her breathing heavy. Won't you give me a chance? She asked, her voice weak. You took your chance, he said, when you went to him. Goodbye, Clara. He hung up without waiting for an answer. The phone fell on the table with a dull thud, and Lucas covered his face with his hands. His heart was pounding, anger mixed with pain. She had threatened to sue, demanded the house, the children. After betraying him, he splashed water on his face from the tap. The cold moisture calmed him a little. The children were still asleep, but he couldn't stay home. He needed a lawyer. Now. Lucas took his keys and drove into downtown Astoria. The office of Maya Torres, his college girlfriend and lawyer, was in a small brick building on the main street. He parked, grabbed the bag containing the prenuptial agreement, and walked in. The receptionist, a young woman with brightly colored nails, smiled. Mr. Harper, Maya's waiting, she said, nodding toward the door. Lucas walked inside. Maya was sitting at a desk covered in folders. Her dark hair was pulled back into a neat bun, and her glasses had slipped down her nose. She looked up and stood, holding out her hand. Lucas, it's been a while, she said with a small smile. You look terrible. I haven't slept, he replied, shaking her hand and sitting up. Clara, I need your help. Tell me, Maya said, sitting down and opening her notebook. Lucas exhaled, his voice even but tight. She cheated on me, with a coworker, Elliot. Admitted it yesterday. I kicked her out. She called this morning, threatening to sue. I want the house, custody of the kids. Maya frowned, her pen still. Seriously? She asked. She admitted to cheating? Yeah, Lucas nodded. She said it was once, in his studio. Deliberately. That's a clue, Maya said, making a note. Do you have the contract? Here, Lucas pulled a folded document out of his bag and handed it to her. We signed this before the wedding. The house is mine, bought before the marriage. Separate finances. Maya opened the contract, her eyes quickly running over the text. She said, nodding, the house is registered in your name. The renovation was before the wedding. This is your protection. Assets. My bill is from work, Lucas said. Her bill is from candles. We didn't mix. Excellent, Maya said, leafing through the pages. The contract is strong. She can demand, but the judge will see that the house is yours. Cheating is another trump card. She wants kids, Lucas said, his voice shaking. She said she won't give them up. Maya peered at him over her glasses. The court likes stability, she said. You're in a home, with a job, no blemishes. She cheated, that's a fact. But she's their mother. If she can prove she can give them a home, the court might consider joint custody. She doesn't have a home, Lucas said. She's at a friend's. No work, except candles. For now, Maya clarified, she can rent an apartment, strengthen the business. But for now, you're in a strong position. Do you want the full one? Yes, Lucas said, his voice firm. They stay with me. She can see them, but she lives here. Okay? Maya nodded, making another note. I'll start with the divorce notice. She'll get it in a couple of days. Then we'll file suit. Divorce with kids can take a while in Oregon, but we can speed it up if she doesn't contest it. She will, Lucas said, his voice growing darker. She promised a lawyer. Let her try, Maya said, her eyes glittering. We'll use the contract and her confession. What do the kids say? Ava hates me, Lucas said quietly. Owen is crying. I don't know how to protect them. Maya put her pen down, her gaze softening. You can't, she said. They'll suffer. But you give them a home, you. She destroyed it, not you. Lucas nodded, but Clara's words still stung. She blames me, he said. She said I didn't notice her, that it was my fault. Nonsense, Maya snapped. She made a choice. Don't let her confuse you. I won't, Lucas said, clenching his fists. She won't take the kids, or the house. Then we're in business, Maya said, smiling. I'll get the papers ready. Come tomorrow and sign them. Thank you, Lucas said, his voice sincere. Lucas Harper pulled into the Brew Haven parking lot, his blue Jeep Cherokee tires squeaking on the asphalt. It was a Tuesday morning, and he'd decided to stop for coffee before heading to work at Coast Brew Works. After a rough weekend, Clara's confession of infidelity, her leaving, the talk with his kids, and the threat of a lawsuit, Lucas was drained. He turned off the engine, looking up at the sign for the coffee shop. This place was special. It was where he'd met Clara 14 years ago, when she'd served him a latte with a smile. He rarely comes here anymore, but today he needed the caffeine to stay awake at the wheel. He got out of the car, slamming the door, and headed for the entrance. The bell above the door jingled, and the smell of freshly ground beans enveloped him. It was warm inside, a few tables occupied, a barista fiddling with the machine behind the counter. Lucas joined the line, eyeing the menu board, black coffee, no sugar, as always. And then he heard laughter. Light, melodic, with that note he knew all too well. His heart sank, and he turned. Clara was sitting at a table by the window. Her brown hair was loose, and she was smiling, leaning toward the man across from her. Lucas froze. It was him, Elliot, though Lucas had never seen him before. Tall, with dark hair, wearing a gray shirt and jeans, he looked about 35. His hand was on the table, almost touching her fingers, and he laughed back, looking into her eyes. They sat close, their mugs of coffee next to each other, like a couple on a date. Lucas felt the blood rush to his face. He hadn't seen her since Sunday, when he'd thrown her out of the house after she'd confessed to cheating on him. Her call threatening to sue was still ringing in his ears, and now she was here with him. With Elliot. Lucas clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms. He wanted to leave, but his legs wouldn't obey. The line was moving, but he didn't notice. His eyes were glued to them. Next, the barista, a young woman with a pierced nose, called. Lucas blinked, stepped toward the counter. Black coffee, he said, his voice hoarse. He pulled out his wallet, handed over the money, but his eyes found Clara again. She leaned closer to Elliot, whispering something, and he nodded, smiling. Her hand brushed his, a slight, almost casual movement, but Lucas knew it was no accident. She had done this to him once, touched his hand, laughed at his jokes. Now it was for someone else. Your coffee, the barista said, holding out a cardboard cup. Lucas took it, the hot cardboard burning his fingers. He could have walked away. He should have. But instead he turned back to their table. His legs carried him forward, each step heavy, as if he were walking on concrete. He stopped at their table, clutching the cup. Clara looked up, and her smile disappeared. She went pale, her hand hovering over the table. "Lucas," she said, her voice weak, almost a whisper, "what are you doing here?" "I'll take the coffee," he replied, his tone cold. He looked at Elliot, who tensed but didn't look away. "And you?" Clara swallowed, her eyes darting around. We were just talking," she said, fiddling with the edge of her sleeve. "We were talking," Lucas repeated, his lips twisting into a bitter smile. He glanced at Elliot. "You're Elliot, then?" The man nodded, his movements careful. "Yeah," he said, his voice even. "Look, I don't want any trouble." "Problems?" Lucas stepped closer, his voice growing louder. "You slept with my wife. Don't tell me about problems." Clara jumped up, her chair scraping against the floor. "Lucas, don't," she said, her voice shaking. "Not here. Please." "Why?" He turned to her, his eyes narrowing. "You weren't shy when you were with him. Why now?" "Stop it," Clara said, her eyes filling with tears. "I didn't want you to see that." "But I see," Lucas said, his voice growing louder, and several heads in the coffee shop turned toward them. "You're sitting here, laughing with him, like nothing happened, like you didn't break up our family." "I didn't," Clara snapped, her voice hardening. "You kicked me out. You didn't give me a chance." "A chance?" he barked, his hand squeezing the glass so hard the cardboard crumpled. "You slept with him. You chose him. What chance are you waiting for?" Elliot stood up, his movements slow but firm. "Calm down," he said, looking at Lucas. "You're scaring her." "Take your voice down," Lucas said, his tone low, menacing. "You have no right to speak. You slept with her." "I won't fight," Elliot said, raising his hands. "But she's with me. You kicked her out." Lucas felt his anger boiling. "With me," he repeated, looking at Clara. "Is that true? You're with him now?" Clara looked down, her tears dripping onto the table. "Lucas, please," she whispered. "Don't do this." "You did," he said, his voice hoarse. "You chose him, not me, not the children." "It's not like that," she said, her voice breaking. I'm just trying to live." Lucas looked at her tears, her trembling lips, her hand still closed to Elliot. She was beautiful, even now, and that made it worse. He remembered looking at her in this coffee shop all those years ago, the way she'd smiled as she handed him his coffee. Now she was sitting with someone else, and he couldn't bear it. "Are you happy?" he asked, his voice quiet but sharp. "With him? After everything?" Clara was silent, her eyes downcast. "I don't know," she said finally. "I'm just trying." "Good luck to you," he said, turning toward the door. His voice was cold, but inside he was burning. He took a step, then another, feeling anger and pain mingle in his chest. "Lucas," Clara called, her voice weak, but he didn't turn around. The bell jingled as he walked out. The cold morning air hit him face. He tossed the crushed cup into the trash can by the door, coffee spilling onto the pavement. Lucas climbed into the Jeep, gripping the steering wheel. The engine started with a roar, and he pulled out of the parking lot. She was with Elliot, laughing, touching him, as if she hadn't begged him to come back 3 days ago, as if she hadn't destroyed their family. Lucas slammed the steering wheel, the horn blaring in the quiet street. Ava hated him, Owen cried, and Clara sat in a coffee shop with her lover. Was this her fight for the kids? For the house? He gritted his teeth, his eyes glued to the road. She had made her choice. Now he would make his. Lucas Harper stood at the stove, stirring taco filling in a sizzling pan. The smell of chicken, olive oil, and spices filled the kitchen of the Astoria cottage, mingling with the warmth of the oven where the tortillas were baking. It was Tuesday morning, and after the scene in the coffee shop where he'd seen Clara with Elliot, Lucas had felt crushed. Her laughter, her hand on his, it stung like an open wound. But he knew he had to keep his temper for the kids. Ava was angry, Owen missed his mother, and Lucas had decided to make dinner simple, familiar, an attempt to regain some sense of normalcy. He glanced at the table. 3 plates, 3 forks, 3 glasses. Not 4. It was weird, but he gritted his teeth and kept cooking. The door to the living room was open, and Lucas could hear Owen humming to himself as he fiddled with the model airplane. Ava was in her room, her music coming through the closed door. Lucas turned off the frying pan, got out a bowl of sliced tomatoes, and began to spoon the filling into the tortillas. He wasn't a master of the kitchen, but he knew Clara's tacos by heart from years of dinners. Tonight, he wanted everything to be like it used to be, at least for an hour. "Ava, Owen," he called, putting the bowl on the table. "Dinner's ready." Footsteps thundered down the stairs. Owen was the first to arrive, his blonde hair disheveled and his F-16 t-shirt riding up slightly. "Tacos?" he asked, his eyes lighting up as he sat down at the table. "Yeah," Lucas said, smiling. "Your favorites." Owen grabbed the flatbread, his fingers already covered in sauce. "Cool," he said, taking a bite. Ava came down more slowly, her dark hair pulled back into a loose ponytail and her face scowling. She was holding her phone, but when she noticed Lucas looking at her, she shoved it into her pocket. "Tacos again," she muttered, sitting down across from Owen. "Yes, Ava," Lucas said, placing a plate in front of her. "Eat. You need it." "I'm not hungry," she replied, crossing her arms and looking at the table. "Try it," he said, sitting down between them. I tried. Ava snorted, but took a tortilla, poking at the filling with her fork. Lucas watched them, feeling the heaviness in his chest ease a little. It wasn't a perfect dinner, not like the old days, when Clara joked and the kids laughed. But they were here together. He took a bite of the taco, trying not to think about the empty seat at the table. "Mom always added cheese," Owen said, swallowing a bite. "The grated kind, you know, the yellow kind." Lucas froze, his hand holding the flatbread still. "Right," he said, nodding. "I forgot. Do you want me to get it?" "Yeah," Owen smiled, and Lucas stood up, opening the fridge. He found a pack of shredded cheddar, sprinkled it on Owen's tacos, and returned the bowl to the table. "Is that better?" he asked, sitting back down. "Cool," Owen said, taking another bite. But Mom's still had a lot of cheese in them. Lucas nodded, his smile tight. He waited for Owen to mention Clara. The boy missed her, it was obvious. Ava was silent, her eyes fixed on her plate, but Lucas noticed the way her fingers tightened around her fork. "Ava, why are you so quiet?" he asked, looking at his daughter. "I don't want to talk," she muttered without looking up. "You're always like this," Owen said, chewing. "Always silent, like a zombie." "Shut up, Owen," Ava snapped, her voice sharp. "You don't understand anything." "Hey, that's enough," Lucas said, his tone firm. "We're eating, no fighting." Owen shrugged, continuing to eat. Ava dropped her fork onto her plate, her eyes shining. "I saw Mom," she said suddenly, her voice quiet but firm. "Today, at the coffee shop." Lucas froze, his heart clenching. He knew Ava had gone to Brew Haven with a friend after school. She'd mentioned it that morning. But he didn't think she'd seen Clara. Or Elliot. "You were there?" he asked, trying to keep his voice even. "Yeah," Ava said, looking at him. She was with him. With that guy, Elliot. They were laughing. She looked happy. Lucas clenched his fists under the table, feeling his anger flare. He'd seen them that morning, Clara, her hand on Elliot, their smiles. Now Ava saw it too. "What do you think?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Ava looked down, her lips trembling. "I was mad at you," she said quietly. "I thought you'd just kicked her out. But she was with him. She didn't miss us. You're probably right." Lucas felt a stab of pain. Ava acknowledged his rightness, but it didn't bring relief. Her words were as bitter as his own thoughts. "I didn't want to be right," he said, looking at her. "I wanted her to choose us." "She didn't choose," Ava said, her voice breaking. "She's there with him, and we're here. Why did she do this?" I don't know, Lucas answered honestly. Sometimes people do bad things, but it's not about you. It's not your fault. Owen looked at them, his eyes wide. Mom's with the other uncle? He asked, his voice confused. Like in the movies? Yeah, kid, Lucas said, his voice soft. But this isn't a movie. This is life. I miss her, Owen said, putting down his fork. Will she come back? Lucas pressed his lips together, choosing his words. She'll call, he said. You'll be able to talk to her, but she'll be living separately. Owen nodded, his eyes dropping to his plate. Ava wiped her tears with her sleeve, her face tense. You're a better cook than she is, she said suddenly, her voice weak, but with a hint of sarcasm. Lucas looked at her, surprised. Seriously? He asked, his eyebrows raised. She was always bragging about her tacos. They were too sharp, Ava said, her lips twitching into a small smile. Yours are fine. Owen chuckled, his sadness fading a little. She dropped all the cheese once, he said. Remember? The floor was yellow. Lucas laughed, a short, hoarse sound, but it broke the tension. Yeah, he said, shaking his head. I was cleaning, and she laughed like it was my fault. She always laughed, Owen said, his voice quieter. She doesn't laugh now. Lucas looked at his son, guilt tightening in his chest. She's still your mom, he said, and she loves you. It's just, things got more complicated. Ava snorted, but her gaze softened. Do you really think she loves us? She asked, her voice almost a whisper. Yes, Lucas said, looking into her eyes. I know, but she made a choice, and we have to live with it. Ava nodded, grabbed another taco, and began to eat. Owen followed suit, his appetite returning. Lucas watched them, feeling something inside him let go. They had argued, remembered Clara, but now they were laughing, quietly but sincerely. It hadn't been a perfect night, but it was their night. Dad, can I have some more cheese? Owen asked, pointing to his plate. Just don't drop it like Mom, Lucas said, standing up to get the bowl. Owen giggled, and even Ava smiled. After dinner, the kids helped clean up. Owen wiped the table. Ava put the leftovers in the refrigerator. Can we watch a movie? Owen asked, looking at his father. Yes, Lucas said. Choose. I'll join. They moved into the living room and turned on an old airplane cartoon, Owen's favorite. Ava didn't mind, though she usually called it childish. Lucas sat on the couch, watching the screen, but his thoughts were with the kids. They were laughing at the jokes, and it was the first warmth he'd felt in days of pain. It was a step, a small one, but an important one. Dad, Ava said quietly as Owen fell asleep on the couch. I'm sorry I yelled at you. Lucas looked at her, his heart clenching. It's okay, he said. You're angry. I understand. I still want her here, she said, her voice weak. But I saw her with him. She won't come back, right? Not here, Lucas replied, his voice soft. But we can do it, together. Ava nodded, her eyes shining. She moved closer, resting her head on his shoulder. Lucas wrapped his arms around her, feeling the warmth of her body comforting him. This was their first step toward a new life, without Clara, but together. Lucas Harper adjusted the collar of his shirt as he sat on the wooden bench in the Clatsop County courtroom in Astoria, Oregon. The courtroom was small, with tall windows that let in the cold December light. The smell of polished wood and old files mingled with the tension in the air. Today, 6 months after Clara admitted to cheating on Elliot and left home, the final stage of their divorce was about to begin. Lucas clenched his fists, feeling the sweat on his palms. Clara wanted the house and joint custody of Ava and Owen, but his attorney, Maya Torres, was confident in their position. The prenuptial agreement and the fact that Clara had cheated on him would be decisive. Maya sat next to him, her dark hair pulled back into a neat bun, holding a folder of papers in her hands. Relax, she whispered, glancing at him. We're ready. Lucas nodded, but his gaze was drawn to the opposite side of the room, where Clara sat. Her brown hair was done up, and she was wearing a navy blue dress, but her face looked haggard. Next to her was her lawyer, a woman in her 40s with a short haircut, and Elliot, who sat a little behind her. His presence cut Lucas like a knife, reminding him of the coffee shop where he had seen them together. Clara wasn't looking at him. Her eyes were down at the table. The judge, an older man with gray hair named Harold Kennedy, walked into the courtroom. Everyone stood. "Please be seated," he said, his voice deep and authoritative. "The case is Harper v. Harper, divorce and custody." Lucas sat up, his heart pounding. Maya opened the folder, ready to begin. The judge flipped through the papers, his glasses glinting in the light of the lamps. "Miss Torres, your opening statement," he said. Maya stood, her voice clear. "Your Honor, my client, Lucas Harper, has filed for divorce on the grounds of adultery on the part of Clara Harper. We will present evidence of her admission of adultery, as well as a prenuptial agreement signed in 2010 that protects Mr. Harper's property, including the family home. We ask for full custody of the children, Ava and Owen, taking into account their preferences and the stability that Mr. Harper provides." The judge nodded, writing something down. "Miss Reynolds, you have the floor," he said, turning to Clara's attorney. The woman stood up, her tone confident. "Your Honor, my client, Clara Harper, acknowledges that there were difficulties in the marriage, but disputes the allegations of adultery as the sole basis for the divorce. She has invested considerable effort in the family and home, including financially contributing to its upkeep. We ask for joint custody of the children and division of property, taking into account her rights as a mother and a spouse." Lucas gritted his teeth. Financial contribution? Clara sold candles, but the house had been bought with his savings, and the contract clearly confirmed it. Maya squeezed his hand under the table, her eyes saying, "Easy." The judge looked up. "Let's begin with the evidence," he said. "Miss Torres, your arguments." Maya stood up, holding a copy of the contract. "Your Honor, the prenuptial agreement, signed September 7, 2010, clearly states that the house on Maple Street, Astoria, was purchased by Lucas Harper prior to the marriage in 2009. All renovations were completed prior to the marriage. The spouse's financial accounts remained separate, as evidenced by bank statements. Clara Harper contributed no funds toward the purchase or renovation of the house." She handed the papers to the judge's assistant, then continued. "As to adultery, we present a written statement from Lucas Harper in which Clara admitted to having sex with Elliot Spencer on May 30th. It happened in his studio, and she says she did it knowingly. This establishes adultery, which is grounds for divorce based on fault in Oregon." The judge nodded, looking over the papers. "Miss Reynolds, what is your position?" he asked. Clara's attorney stood up. "Your Honor, my client does not deny the isolated incident, but she insists that it does not define her as a spouse or a mother. She has contributed emotional and financial labor to the family, including paying for utilities and caring for the children. The home, though purchased before the marriage, is a family home because of her efforts. We ask that you recognize her contribution and award joint custody, taking into account the best interests of the children." Lucas felt his anger rise. Emotional labor? She'd slept with Elliot while he worked at the brewery. Maya leaned toward him. "That's a weak argument," she whispered. "A contract is stronger." The judge wrote something down, then looked around the courtroom. "I want to hear from the children," he said. "Ava and Owen Harper, come forward." Lucas clenched his fists, his stomach churning. Ava and Owen were waiting in the witness room with a social worker. They walked in, Ava straight-backed, her dark hair braided, but her face set in a frown. Owen, 9, was holding her hand, his blonde hair falling into his eyes. They sat in the witness box, looking small in the large room. The judge softened his voice. "Ava, Owen, I want you to feel comfortable. Tell me who you want to live with and why." Ava looked at Lucas, then at Clara, her eyes hard. "I want to stay with Daddy," she said, her voice clear. "Mom, she was with another man. She left us for him. Daddy's always home, taking care of us. Lucas felt his throat tighten. Ava had been angry with him after Clara left, but her words in the coffee shop about seeing Clara with Elliot had changed her. She was no longer protective of her mother. The judge nodded, writing it down. Thank you, Ava. Owen? Owen looked at Lucas, his eyes wet. I want to go with Dad, he whispered, his voice shaking. Mom's gone. I don't want to live with her. Clara sobbed, covering her mouth with her hand. Elliot put his hand on her shoulder, and Lucas gritted his teeth, fighting the urge to stand up. The judge looked at the children. Are you sure? He asked softly. Yes, Ava said, her voice firm. Owen nodded, leaning into his sister. Okay, the judge said. You can go back to the social worker. The kids walked out, Ava holding Owen's hand. Lucas watched them go, feeling a mixture of pride and pain. They had chosen him, but their words about Clara cut like a knife. Maya squeezed his hand, her eyes confident. The judge leafed through the papers. I've reviewed the contract, the evidence, and the parties' positions, he said. In Oregon, a prenuptial agreement is legally binding if it is entered into voluntarily and without duress. The document shows that the house is owned by Lucas Harper, purchased before the marriage. Clara Harper's financial contribution to the house is not proven. The house remains in Mr. Harper's name. Lucas exhaled, but the tension did not go away. Clara lowered her head. Her lawyer whispered something to her. With respect to custody, the judge continued, the interests of the children are paramount. Ava and Owen have clearly expressed a desire to live with their father. Given the stability provided by Lucas Harper and the fact of Clara Harper's adultery, I award full physical and legal custody to Mr. Harper. Clara Harper will have weekend visitation rights, subject to the children's consent. Clara began to sob, her shoulders shaking. Elliot hugged her, and Lucas turned away, feeling anger mixed with emptiness. The judge banged his gavel. Divorce granted. Property divided as agreed. Case dismissed. Lucas stood up, his legs weak. Maya gathered up the papers, her face calm. We won, she said quietly. The house is yours. The children are with you. Thank you, Lucas said, his voice hoarse. He looked at Clara. She stood up, her eyes red, but she didn't look at him. Elliot took her arm, and they walked out of the hall, their footsteps echoing in the silence. Lucas stood there, feeling the bitter taste of victory. He had kept the house, the children, everything he had built. But it was no joy. He saw Clara's tears, her pain, and he knew that the children were suffering despite his victory. Come on, Maya said, touching his shoulder. The children are waiting. Lucas nodded, picked up his bag, and walked out of the room. Outside, the cold wind hit his face. Lucas Harper parked his blue Jeep Cherokee in front of a low building in downtown Astoria labeled Family Therapy Center. It was a cold January morning, gray clouds covering the sky and a light rain pattering against the windshield. It had been a month and a half since a judge had awarded him the house and full custody of Ava and Owen, leaving Clara with visitation rights. It had been a bittersweet victory. Ava was angry, Owen missed his mother, and Lucas was broken. Today was their first appointment with a psychologist, Dr. Linda Wood, recommended by the school counselor. Lucas turned off the engine, glancing at the kids in the back seat. Ava was frowning at her phone. Owen was staring out the window, clutching his sketchbook. Come on, Lucas said, opening the door. We're not late. Ava rolled her eyes, but put her phone in her pocket. This is stupid, she muttered as she walked out. Why do we need this? To make it easier, Lucas replied, his voice calm but firm. For all of us. Owen followed silently, clutching the sketchbook to his chest. Lucas led them inside. The waiting room smelled of lavender, and posters with quotes about hope hung on the walls. The receptionist, a woman with a kind smile, pointed to the door. Dr. Wood is waiting, she said. Linda Wood's office was cozy. A soft sofa, colorful pillows, a table with pencils and paper. Linda, a woman in her 40s with short blonde hair and warm eyes, stood up, holding out her hand. Mr. Harper, Ava Owen, she said, her voice soft. It's good to see you. Please sit down. Lucas sat down on the couch, Ava plopping down next to him, crossing her arms. Owen settled into a chair, resting his sketchbook on his lap. Linda smiled, sitting down across from him. We're just getting to know each other today, she said. I want to see how you're feeling. Shall we start with you, Ava? Ava snorted, looking at the floor. I don't want to be here, she said, her voice sharp. It's all because of Mom. She left, and now we have to go to counseling. Linda nodded, her face calm. Are you mad at Mom? She asked. Yeah, Ava said, her eyes flashing. She promised us a trip to Seattle. We were supposed to go over the summer, the whole family. And then she started, with this Elliot. She left us. Lucas clenched his fists, feeling a stab of pain. He knew about Seattle's promise. Clara had told the kids about it, but had canceled, citing work. Now he knew what was distracting her. It sounds like you feel betrayed, Linda said, her voice soft. Want to tell me what exactly makes you angry? Ava shrugged, but her voice dropped. I thought she'd come back, but then I saw her with him. At the coffee shop, she was laughing like she didn't care. I hate her for that. Linda wrote something down in her notebook. It's okay to be angry, she said. You love your mom, but her actions hurt you. We can work on that. Do you want to try? Maybe, Ava muttered, looking away. Linda turned to Owen. And you, Owen, how do you feel? Owen opened the sketchbook, his fingers fiddling with the pencil. I miss my mom, he said quietly. She used to make pancakes on Saturdays. They're gone now. Lucas felt his throat tighten. He tried making pancakes, but Owen always compared them to his mother's. Linda nodded, her eyes warm. You like drawing airplanes, right? She asked, looking at the sketchbook. Yeah, Owen said, his face lighting up. That's an F-16. I want to be a pilot. Cool, Linda said. How about you draw an airplane while we talk? It helps. Owen nodded and began to draw, his pencil sliding across the paper. Linda looked at Lucas. Mr. Harper, how are you doing? She asked. Lucas shrugged, his voice hoarse. I'll try, he said. For them, but it's hard. Would you like to come separately? Linda suggested. We can talk about you. Maybe, Lucas said, unsure if he was ready. We'll see. Linda smiled. Okay, she said. We'll start with the kids once a week. You think about it. The session ended an hour later. Ava left silent, but her shoulders were slightly less tense. Owen showed Lucas a drawing of the airplane, and Lucas complimented him, feeling a glimmer of hope. They returned home, and Lucas made an appointment for their next visit. A week later, Ava was talking about Seattle again, her anger replaced by sadness. She promised a Ferris wheel, she told Linda. I was looking forward to it, and now it's gone. You feel like you've lost not only your mom, but your dream, Linda said. Maybe we can find a way to get that dream back. Ava shrugged, but thought about it. Owen drew another plane, but he added his mother in the cockpit. She would be proud, he said quietly. Linda helped them express their feelings, and Lucas saw their pain ease a little. A month later, Lucas decided to have a session for himself. He walked into Linda's office feeling out of place. I don't know why I'm here, he said, sitting down on the couch. I just want to make things better for the kids. Linda smiled, her gaze attentive. What about you? She asked. You're suffering too. Lucas shrugged, his hands clenching in his lap. I thought it was forever, he said, his voice shaking. We were building a family, and she chose him. You feel betrayed, Linda said, and guilty. Yeah, Lucas admitted. Clara said I didn't notice her. Maybe it's true. Maybe I could have done something. Linda shook her head. She made a choice, she said. You didn't force her. You worked for the family. Her actions are her responsibility. Lucas nodded, but the pain didn't go away. I don't know what to do next, he said. The kids suffer. I can't protect them. You give them stability, Linda said. A home, love you. It's more than you think. Give yourself time. Lucas was silent, her words slowly sinking into his head. I just want them to be happy, he finally said. They will, Linda said, and you will too, step by step. Rain pounded the windshield of Lucas Harper's blue Jeep Cherokee as he drove down I-5 toward Seattle. The June morning was gray, but the mood inside was light for the first time in months. It had been 6 months since Clara had left home after confessing to cheating on her, and 3 months since they began seeing Linda Wood, a therapist. Ava and Owen were starting to get along. Ava was less angry, Owen was smiling more. But Lucas knew they needed more, not just talking, but something that would bring joy back to them. The idea for the trip to Seattle came when Ava mentioned Clara's promise again. The Ferris wheel, the boardwalk, a family day. Clara hadn't kept her word, but Lucas had decided he'd do it for her. He glanced in the rearview mirror. Ava, 13, had her headphones in, her dark hair hanging out from under her baseball cap, but she was humming a tune as she looked out the window. Owen, 9, was leafing through a book about airplanes, his blonde hair falling into his eyes. Lucas smiled, feeling a warmth in his chest. This was their first trip since everything had fallen apart, and he wanted it to be special. Are we there soon? Owen asked, looking up from his book. In about 2 hours, Lucas replied, turning onto the exit. Want something to eat? Yes, Owen said, his eyes lighting up. Can I have burgers? Ava, Lucas looked at his daughter in the mirror. Okay, she muttered, taking off her headphones, but only with potatoes. Lucas pulled into a roadside diner where they ordered burgers and milkshakes. Owen chatted about planes and Ava scrolled through her phone, but her lips twitched into a smile when Lucas joked about her love of ketchup. After their snacks, they got back in the car and continued driving. The rain had gotten heavier, but Lucas put on an old Nirvana playlist and Ava started singing along. Owen joined in, stumbling over the words, and Lucas laughed, feeling the tension melt away. By midday, they were in Seattle, greeted by wet streets and brightly colored signs. Lucas parked near the waterfront, where a large Ferris wheel stood. Ava jumped out of the car, her eyes wide. Is that it? She asked, looking up at the wheel. Yeah, Lucas said, getting out the umbrellas. Ready? Yes, Owen shouted, pulling his hood up. Ava nodded, her face brightening. They bought tickets and climbed into the wheel's cabin. Rain pounded the roof, but the view of Elliott Bay and the city was breathtaking. Ava pressed herself against the window, her breath fogging the glass. This is cool, she said quietly. Mom said it was beautiful. Lucas nodded, his throat tight. He didn't want to think about Clara, but her shadow was still with them. She was right, he said, putting his hand on Ava's shoulder. But we're here, together. The wheel spun, and Owen squealed as the cabin rose higher. It's like being on a plane, he shouted, and Ava laughed, her voice clear. Lucas watched them, feeling warmth spread through his chest. This was their moment. After the wheel, they ran through the rain to a hot dog stand. Lucas ordered 3, with mustard for himself, ketchup for Ava, and none for Owen. They ate standing under the awning, water dripping from their umbrellas. Ava giggled when Owen dropped a piece of bread, and Lucas pretended to be angry, wiping his face with a napkin. You're worse than me, Owen said, laughing. You're the one who got the ketchup on, Ava shot back, and they began to argue over who was dirtier. Lucas looked at them, his smile genuine. The rain was soaking their sneakers, but they didn't care. They walked along the embankment, stopping at souvenir shops. Owen chose a model airplane, Ava a bracelet with a shell. Lucas bought them ice cream, despite the rain, and they ate it, running under the arch by the pier. Ava slipped on the wet tiles, and Lucas caught her, both laughing. Owen jumped in puddles, his jacket was soaked, but he was happy. They returned to the car in the evening, tired but happy. Lucas turned on the heat, and the kids settled into the back seat, Ava with a bracelet on her wrist, Owen with the model airplane. The rain had stopped, and the sunset was turning the sky orange. Thank you, Dad, Ava whispered, her voice soft. She was looking out the window, but her hand touched his shoulder. Lucas smiled, his eyes stinging. Glad you liked it, he said. Owen leaned over the seat and hugged him, his wet hair pressing against Lucas's cheek. That was great, he said. Can we do it again? Absolutely, Lucas said, hugging him back. He started the engine, and they drove home. The drive back was quieter. Ava dozed off. Owen leafed through a book. Lucas watched the highway, feeling the warmth of their day settle in his chest. It wasn't just a day, it was their moment, without Clara, but full of love. They became stronger. Their new family took shape. At home, they collapsed on the couch, still in their wet clothes. Ava turned on the TV, and Owen showed Lucas his plane. It looks real, he said, and Lucas nodded, stroking his head. Saturday morning, soft light filtered through the pines on the porch of Lucas Harper's cottage. He leaned on the railing, holding a mug of coffee. The cool Astoria air smelled of salt and pine, reminding him of the sea nearby. It had been a year since Clara had left, confessing to an affair with Elliot, and their lives had fallen apart. The court victory, the therapy, the trip to Seattle, they had all been steps toward healing. Now, looking out at the pines, Lucas felt calm. Not complete, but real. The Harpers were building a new life, the three of them. He took a sip of coffee, listening to the noise coming from the kitchen. Ava and Owen were busy at the stove, making waffles, their new Saturday tradition. A year ago, Ava had screamed, blaming him for Clara leaving. Owen had cried, missing his mother. Now they were laughing, and that sound was more precious to Lucas than anything else. He turned, walking into the house, where the smell of vanilla and dough filled the air. Ava, now 14, stood at the waffle iron, her dark hair pulled back into a high ponytail. She frowned at the smoke rising from the stove. "Owen, I told you not to touch the button," she muttered, nudging her brother. "I didn't touch it," said Owen 10, waving his spoon. His blonde hair was sticking out in all directions, and there was a batter stain on his airplane t-shirt. He started dancing around, humming the theme song. "Waffles, waffles, yummy waffles." "You're unbearable," Ava said, but her lips twitched into a smile. Lucas walked in, setting his mug on the table. "Don't burn the kitchen down," he said, crossing his arms. His voice was stern, but his eyes were laughing. "I'm not burning," Ava protested, opening the waffle iron. "Owen is in the way." "I'm helping," Owen pirouetted, nearly dropping the bowl of dough. Lucas caught it, shaking his head. "You're as helpful as a hurricane," he said, putting the bowl back. "Sit down before you ruin everything." Owen chuckled, plopping down in his chair. Ava scooped the waffles onto a plate, her movements confident. "Done," she announced, setting the plate down on the table. "And they didn't burn, by the way." Lucas sat down, looking at the golden waffles. "They look good," he said, taking one. "But I'm the judge." "You're always picky," Ava said, sitting down across from him. She poured syrup on her drink, her seashell bracelet, a souvenir from Seattle, clanking on the table. Owen grabbed a waffle, dipping it in syrup. "Better than the cafe," he declared, chewing. "You're just hungry," Ava teased, but her tone was playful. She looked at Lucas. "So, what do you think?" Lucas took a bite, chewing with mock seriousness. He said, pausing. "Lax, drama. Should have burned at least one." Ava rolled her eyes but laughed. "You're terrible," she said. "We tried." "I'm kidding," Lucas said, smiling. "Delicious. You guys are great." Owen began to dance on his chair, waving his fork. "We are the waffle champions," he sang, and Ava snorted but joined in, humming the tune. Lucas watched them, feeling warmth fill his chest. This was their home, their morning, their life. A year ago, things were different. After Clara left, Lucas struggled with her threats to sue, the children's pain, and his own wound. The court gave him the house and full custody, but the children suffered. Ava was angry. Owen missed his mother's pancakes. Therapy with Linda Wood helped. Ava learned to talk about her anger. Owen drew airplanes to express his longing. The trip to Seattle was a turning point, their laughter in the rain, Owen's hug, Ava's whisper, "Thank you, Dad." They were stronger now. Lucas sold the Jeep 6 months ago. The old Jeep reminded him of the past, of Clara. With the money he got, he bought a boat, small but sturdy. On weekends, they went to the Columbia River, fished, swam. Ava learned to drive. Owen looked for frogs on the shore. These were their days without Clara, but full of life. He picked up the guitar he'd abandoned after their wedding. In the evenings, when the kids were doing their homework, Lucas would pick up an old acoustic and play. Ava would tease him, calling him not a rock star, but sometimes she'd sing with him, her voice clear. Owen would dance, waving his arms like propellers. These moments were their anchor. Clara lived in Portland with Elliot. Lucas had heard from friends. She called the kids, but they rarely answered. Ava would say, "She's with him, I don't want her." Owen was silent, but his drawings no longer included his mother. Lucas didn't force it, they decided for themselves. Clara was their mother, but her choice left a chasm. "Dad, you're lost in thought again," Ava said, her voice breaking his thoughts. She was holding a waffle, syrup dripping onto the plate. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," Lucas said, smiling. "Just glad you're here." "Sentimental," Ava teased, but her eyes were warm. She stood up, grabbed another waffle. "Owen, don't eat all the syrup." "I'm not eating," Owen protested, but his face was sticky. He began to dance around the table, singing, "Waffles, waffles." Lucas laughed, shaking his head. "You're like a circus on wheels," he said, standing up to clear the plates. "The circus is cool," Owen said, jumping up and down. Ava helped gather the dishes, her movements light. "Maybe we should go to the boat," she suggested. "The weather is fine." "Good idea," Lucas said, putting the plates in the sink. "But let's clean this up first." "You always talk about cleaning," Ava muttered, but she smiled. They worked together, Owen wiping down the counter, Ava loading the dishwasher. Lucas watched them, feeling the house come alive. This was their new road, not the one he'd planned with Clara, but their own, their own. After cleaning up, they headed out to the river. The launch waited at the dock, its white hull glinting in the sun. Ava took the wheel, Owen sat in the bow, watching for fish. Lucas stood next to her, adjusting her course. "Left," he said, and Ava nodded, her face focused. "I'm a better steerer than you," she said as they docked. "Dream on," Lucas said, laughing. Owen was jumping up and down the bank, holding a landing net. They spent the day on the water, eating sandwiches, laughing when Ava dropped her fishing rod. It was their world, without Clara, but full of warmth. That evening, Lucas picked up his guitar, sitting on the porch. Ava sat next to him, leafing through a notebook of her drawings. Owen danced on the grass, his movements awkward but joyful. Lucas began to play an old song, his fingers deftly strumming the strings. Ava sang along, her voice quiet but clear. "You're not so bad," she said when the song ended. "High praise," Lucas replied, smiling. "Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one."